Sometime in 2016, I found myself working at a place called Lambeth Palace in London. Lambeth Palace is the home of the Archbishop of Canterbury. To give you a little bit of context of who the Archbishop of Canterbury is, I'd like you to take a little look at my boss here, placing a crown on the King of England's head. We were invited as a prayer movement to come and help the Archbishop with an initiative that he had set in place. This is a man who coronates kings. He leads a movement of 87 million Anglicans around the world. He is regularly hosting, heads of state and, all sorts of different people coming through his palace. He speaks in the House of Lords in England, which is our political kind of forum. He's a incredibly influential and powerful man in the United Kingdom. And he invited us, a scruffy little prayer movement, to come along and help with an initiative called Thy Kingdom Come. I found myself working at this strange palace 2 days a week, and it's quite a good name drop to say you work at a palace. Can I just say, when you're working in a 900-year-old palace, the Wi-Fi sucks, right? Because of the walls. Do you know what I mean? It's like a nightmare. And you're in this crypt, and they're like, you're kind of like breaking bread in the crypt, and there's like, this is where Henry VIII kept one of his wives before she was, executed. So you get an idea of context for the age, yeah? And like, there's me, and I really find it hard to be anything other than myself. And I try, and I do it for a few minutes, then it just pops out. My wife said, you can't judge a talk, Brian, on how much people laugh. And I'm like, I won't, Tracy, I won't. But then all of a sudden I find I do, you know? But so, anyway, where were we? And I get lost easily. And so here, and when you're in a palace, you can get really lost really easy. It's quite funny, because you can get up on the roof, and I could tell you things, but I won't. And the idea was that we would help him, the Archbishop, because his call was that God would send his Spirit to empower the church to greater works of evangelism. From Ascension to Pentecost, for 10 days, that we would call out to the Father, asking that he would send his Spirit upon the church for greater works of evangelism. Amazing. And we did that in 39 cathedrals I had around the country in the United Kingdom. We had 1.6 million people turn up that weekend to pray. And one of the things that they wanted to do was, let's make a little video. Everyone wants to make a video. And so they said, what we're going to do, Brian, is we want you to walk around. We want you to do a video of the Archbishop of Canterbury. I'm like, oh my goodness. And they're like, we want you to walk around the garden with him. We need some B-roll. Incidentally, the biggest garden in central London is Buckingham Palace. The third biggest garden is Lambeth Palace. I was checking this out. Second biggest garden in central London belongs to the American Embassy. You guys, always you. You're always there in the background. You always do it bigger and better. So, and you know what? Now, I'm not normally accustomed to walking around talking to archbishops. I have a background that he's an Eton-educated Cambridge scholar who reads commentaries in the morning as part of his devotion in French, okay? Just giving you a little bit of an idea. And despite all my subsequent achievements, I've got a master's degree, my life experience, my leadership of church, the books I've written, the missions work that I've planted, there's a little bit in me that pops up and says, Brian, you are the guy who went to prison 4 times. You are the guy who was homeless and got expelled from school. You're the guy who used to be addicted to drugs. All that kind of stuff pops around my head. Forget all the other stuff. It's weird, isn't it? And I'm just thinking, I've got to walk around the garden with the Archbishop. He's just popped, and we've got to talk for an hour. And what am I going to talk about? And because it's only B-roll, so you just have to chat. Which you can imagine, I'm not that bad at it once I get going, but there's this... And in my head, I have this thing that's, you're an imposter. Who do you think you are? You ever had that? Good, I'm not alone. So as I began to walk with the Archbishop to talk, what on earth shall I ask? What shall I talk about? And he said, what should we talk about? And I just found myself going, I feel like I'm an imposter. That was what I said to him, my opening line. Deep, meaningful. Do you know what? He looked at me and he went, so do I. So do I. And then he went on to say, but what you have to remember, Brian, is that we all have a part to play in the story. You need to take your place in the story. And what we have today here is us taking our place in the story. Isaiah 62 really is part of our story. I have posted watchmen on your walls, Jerusalem. They will never be silent, day or night. For you who call on the Lord, give yourselves no rest, and give him no rest, till he establishes Jerusalem and makes her the praise of the earth. This relentless idea of non-stop night and day prayer is the 24/7 prayer story, and it's your story. And like all great stories, there was always a beginning. And once upon a time, it began in a small town in England called Chichester. Strange name. They call it Chai for short. I always find it fascinating that a great prayer movement was not born in London. You know, we sometimes have a capital city theology, don't we? When God uses Bethlehem and Nazareth. I just don't know where we get it from sometimes. There was a moment when Roger Ellis, who's actually here, was approached by a young man who he was discipling, who said, I've got this idea. I'd like to run a prayer room. I've been inspired by Count Ludwig von Zinzendorf and his 100-year prayer meeting, and I would like to run a 24/7 prayer room. And Roger was the senior pastor. And he said, yes, we honor you for your yes. And he said yes to Pete Gregg. I said, Pete, yeah, it's a crazy idea. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what's going to happen, but go for it. So inspired by Ludwig von Zinzendorf and the Moravian missions movement, empowered by and permissioned by Roger and church leadership, with the support of a creative and, wonderful young team, this prayer room was created in Chichester. It was a room that was a thing of beauty, with art and poetry. Some of it was like your typical prayer room tsunami wave vibe. You can't go in a prayer room without a wave these days. I think, and sometimes there's always a badly painted lion. Then, that sometimes you're wondering, is that a Labrador with a wig? Do you know what I mean? But anyway, these things, that's what I'm bad in prayer rooms. My mind jumps all over the show. But it was a beautiful prayer room. People were fascinated and interested, captivated. They drove to see it. I remember driving to see it. There were guys from Germany who went on a pilgrimage to this prayer room. Rogers told me these things. Pete was enchanted with the idea that, if we gave ourselves no rest, night and day, that something would happen, that there would be personal renewal in individuals, that we would grow in our own devotional life, that something deep within inside us would grow and our love and passion for the Father would grow. But alongside that somehow we could bring down heaven and see revival in the town that he lived in. Amazing. This was a twofold approach of 24/7 prayer, the in and the out. We breathe in, we breathe out. We breathe him in his presence, and we breathe him out in mission. We breathe him in, we breathe him out. So easy. The minute the church stops breathing in and out, it's dead. We need both. I was quite inspired by the In-N-Out burger. I just went and tried one. I had to do it. I was really tired, so I thought, if I have a burger, I'll feel better. It worked for a while. So this idea that the church could somehow come together and be renewed in our own personal and private devotional lives, but at the same time we could call out to God and ask him to come and revive our land, it was a beautiful thing. And the problem was, this was happening on its own, and it was not enough. It was just one prayer room in one country, happily doing all of this. And I was thinking about this a few weeks ago. And I realized that what happened in Revelation Church Chichester, where Roger was the senior pastor, was the first 24/7 prayer room, as we would know it. But the birth of the 24/7 prayer movement happened a few months later. We were at a conference called Cultural Shift in Southampton in September 1999. I was the pastor of a local church. Pete got up and he was preaching, and he went for it, totus porcus. You know that? Latin, okay? Someone once said that about Winston Churchill when he was preaching, when he was making a speech. In the Daily Telegraph, they wrote, he went for it, totus porcus. It means the whole hog. And so, it's when you think about it, it makes total sense. So Pete was Tracy told me to drop that line, but I left it in. So Pete's going for it, and he gets up and he reads out this vision poem. What's the vision? What's the big idea? The vision is Jesus, undeniably Jesus. And it's amazing. And the room is pumping. Incidentally, I had the original vision poem written on a piece of wallpaper that Pete wrote on the prayer room wall, and I lost it. Imagine the money I could make these days on eBay. Anyway, there you go. So, and he makes this, and you know what happened? He says, he gets up at the end of the vision poem and says, anyone else who would like to do a 24/7 prayer room? Is there anyone else in this place who would like to join me? And let us see if we can do a year of non-stop night and day prayer. I was one of the pastors in the room who put my hand up. And it was then that 24/7, not because I put my hand up, there were lots of other pastors, but it was then that 24/7 prayer was born as a movement. Movements are born when people are moved and action is taken. Movements are born when people are moved and action is taken. 52 churches agreed to step up. Can I just say that last year we had 1,420 prayer rooms in 77 nations around the world. That's not to show off or impress you. That's just to give God some glory. But do you know what happens when people step up? 52 churches, a movement was born. If it could happen in Chichester, it could happen anywhere. And until these days, I've often thought, what happened? How did we get here? How did we become part of this story? What went on in that moment? And so let me give you some of the keys, if that would help you. As Gerald was saying, I'm one of the OGs. I don't really like that idea, because in my mind, I've got that song, Forever Young, dodging around in my head. But every time I look in the mirror, I'm like, Brian, you're not blonde, you're gray. You know what I mean? So, Jeremiah 6, verse 16, stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. It was like we tapped into some older, deeper form of spirituality. We got creative and people started to make beautiful spaces for others to connect with God. We thought we were new and we thought we were creative and we thought we were wonderful. But in reality, this had been happening for years. We just didn't always know about it. It's always been the church's job to help people picture themselves in the story. It's always been the church's job to invite people into deeper spiritual lives, to closer relationship with Jesus, and to greater understanding of who he is. If you look, you'll find that prayer rooms have been around a long time. The influence of Ignatius of Loyola on the church, you will see on cathedrals everywhere. For years, they were creative spaces, painted windows and ornate statues to help people engage with God. These old buildings contained all sorts of things, not just to make them look fancy, but once again, just to push the Latin out there. It was the Biblica Pauperum. It was the Bible for the poor, because people couldn't read. So these painted pictures on the windows, these statues, these crosses, they made, a statement. They taught people about the faith. Now, what I would suggest to you, that we're rapidly approaching a generation that cannot read spiritual things. And we need to create spaces where they can come in and understand and encounter Jesus. Did you know, by the way, that nativities, I went in Shields and they were already selling Christmas stuff. Very disturbing. But I know you guys love it. Did you know that nativities were actually created by St. Francis of Assisi? You did? Fantastic. That makes my point less profound. It was to help people recapture and meditate upon the wonder of the original nativity. Creativity, we just like little thing, my son brought me one from Peru. It's lovely, but it's a nice Christmas trinket. No, these are spiritual practices that were put in place to help people picture the birth of Jesus, to help them understand what happened. For us, it's a beautiful thing, but for them, it was a reality. And as they went along, as Ignatius of Loyola started to influence, and there was all these different things about picturing yourself in the story, they created these things called Sacred Montes in Italy. They were mountains that you walked up, and as you stepped in, there were different different full life-size statues and pictures. And you'd walk in and there'd be one of the scenes of the life of Jesus. And you'd walk up and there'd be another scene and another scene and another scene. Some of these had 36 different stations. And eventually you would get to the top where there'd be an empty cross, the resurrection. And so these old guys from 500, 600 years ago, before America was even born, were doing something about helping people picture themselves in the story. And we thought we were doing something new by making creative prayer rooms with fairy lights and walls and whatever. But it had been around for a long time, so we were tapping in to something old. Creativity in connecting people to the divine. Can I just say, I think that prayer should and could fuel a new arts movement. If you were to look at Honestly, if you were to look at Caravaggio or any of those artists, they were deeply, deeply impacted by spirituality and by the life of Jesus. They painted pictures to help people engage with the story of the cross. If you went to these cathedrals, in Norwich Cathedral, I live in Norwich. Remember the guy the other day, Julian of Norwich? So I live in Norwich. I'm so tempted to call one of our sons Julian back then, and it would just not worked. Julian is a man's name as well as a woman's name, isn't it? Cool, just checking. And when you went into the cathedral, written on the walls were etchings of fishing boats. And I said to the curate, I said, what is that? And he said, well, 900 years ago, people would come in here to pray, and they would write their prayers on the wall. 900 years ago. We thought it was a new idea, putting a prayer wall up. People have written on the walls of buildings for years and years. People have been creative at prayer rooms for years and years. And we return to some form of ancient path. And Brueggemann says this, which is beautiful in his magisterial commentary on Jeremiah. It's just beautiful. This return to ancient paths is not a return to old-time religion or the good old days, but a return to a more radical and dangerous memory that serves to end all present complacency, to subvert all present certitudes. What was happening then was something that was so different and radical back then, and God was calling us back to that. You're part of this story. Interestingly, as we journeyed forward with the creation of prayer rooms over the next 20 years, we realized that it was sometimes easier to find a prayer room in a hospital and an airport than it was in a modern church building. It is an honor to be here with this World Prayer Center. But I've been around where our sanctuaries aren't really sanctuaries, they're performance spaces, let's be honest. We're not going to open them up to the lost and the broken because they might run off with like the Korg or the Nord stage, thing and sell it on eBay. We're scared. Do you know what I mean? These things happen. We used to be the people that people knew where to go. I've got a problem, there's a space I can go and quietly weep before Jesus. I can go with my brokenness, my pain. I can take it all to the church. And sometimes we've just made it a little bit inaccessible. These prayer rooms we created were sanctuaries made open and accessible to all. I remember the prayer room we had in Ibiza. A guy walked in one day and he said, I feel safe now. That's what I want people to feel. We actually had a 1,000-year-old watchtower in Ibiza. Not we didn't own it. It was there on the island. And you know what happened? When pirates came marauding, a guy would run up to the top of the watchtower and he would light a fire, a bit Lord of the Ringsy. And then where everyone in the town would run? Into the church for safety and sanctuary. Oh, that we would be the people on the watchtower as we prayed. People would run into the church for safety and sanctuary, to look out as the world around them became a dangerous and uncertain place. The place they knew to go was the church. As we pray, as we call out, that's what we're looking for. And here's what I noticed. Leaders were loving it. Leaders have loved 24/7 prayer for years. Sometimes a little bit guilty of outsourcing the prayer life of the church to other people. And where it really works is where leaders engage with it. See when Tyler's engaging with this? It's working in a local church. It was E.M. Bounds who said, none but praying leaders can have praying followers. Do not outsource the prayer life of your church if you're a church leader here today. We cannot have, at this time, leaders who do not pray. The other thing we found was that the church and can become insular. Did you know that? Look in on ourselves, argue with each other. In many ways, there's a danger in creating prayer spaces. People start to think it's just about going to the prayer room, and it becomes an inward, private, personal thing. And of course, we pray for the nations, we pray for the broken around us, we pray for our city. Of course we do. But if that was all we do, we would never really, as it says in the words of Frederick Buechner, go where your best prayers take you. Or Bob Pierce, the founder of World Vision, was, Lord, my heart, let it be broken with the things that break the heart of God. You see, as we create prayer spaces, as in this next year we run these prayer rooms, we need to remember that we're witnesses, and witnesses is really badly and very clearly linked to the word martyrs, which means martyrs. Martyrs were people who laid their life down. And so that as we step into the prayer room, we need to understand that our lives will be reorientated towards the least, the last, and the lost. And if they're not, you've got to worry about that. We create a space that not only does an inward work in the life of a Christian, but will propel us, the Christians, out into the broken world around us. Numbers 16, verse 46, the rebellion of Korah. Moses said to Aaron, because the people were moaning and groaning, take your censer and put incense in it, along with burning coals from the altar, and hurry to the assembly to make atonement for them. Wrath has come out from the Lord. The plague has started. So Aaron did as Moses said and ran into the midst of the assembly. The plague had already started among the people, but Aaron offered the incense and made atonement for them. He stood between the living and the dead, and the plague stopped. Can I just say, we have to run to the altar. We have to connect with the divine. We have to be filled with the passion of Jesus. We have to collect that fire. We have to be empowered and inspired. But if we stay there, there's a plague going through our land, and we need to be able to run out and stand between the living and the dead. I'm an evangelist at heart. I never thought prayer was a thing, But I've seen more happen through prayer than I ever saw in my street work when I was a young man. Honestly, we are the people who go to the place of prayer, but we must run out into this world around us. Breathe in, breathe out. And so we started seeing prayer rooms in spaces like Ibiza in Spain, which someone called Sodom and Gomorrah in our British national press. We saw prayer rooms in so many different nations, prayer rooms in council estates, in prisons, in schools, university campuses, in abandoned high street shops, in caravans, in tents, at a pagan rock festival in Iceland. Honestly, these prayer rooms started popping up all over the show, just because a few people decided that they would be obedient and say, we'll put our hands up to a year of non-stop night and day prayer. Stuff happened. My wife and I, we moved to Ibiza in Spain. I was the pastor of a church, a lovely church. They teach Latin in the high school in Norfolk. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, I think I went into the police station one day after an accident and said, I've come about the accident. He said, oh, you've not come about the goat, have you? And I said, what do you mean the goat? And he went, no, there's a goat escaped, and we've caught it, and we've keeping it in one of the cells. So I lived in a very rural part of England, where the crime was a lost goat. I had a nice car, Audi A4, lovely, beautiful house, all of that. And in the midst of this 24/7 prayer journey, God said, leave it all and go to Ibiza in Spain. You don't speak Spanish. You don't know how to dance. You dance like your drunken uncle at a wedding. You're going to the club capital of the world. And we did. You see, because when we start saying yes to God, when we start stepping into the place, when we start to pray, God will start to ask things of you. When we say yes to him, he's going to go, okay. I often get moved when people stand up and say, I say yes. And I weep because I think, I'm not fully sure you understand what's going to happen here. I don't weep because I'm scared for them. I just weep at the beauty of our ignorance. Do you know what I mean? I'm just like, my goodness, sorry, is that bad? I don't know. And so we started to we ran a prayer room in this place had more pubs, clubs, and bars than anywhere else in all of Europe. Okay? So we put a prayer room in the middle. Prostitutes who, let's not call them prostitutes, they were ladies who worked as prostitutes. Okay?
I'm not a criminal. I did some crimes, okay? I'm Brian Heasley, a human being, a son of God. No young woman ever wakes up and thinks, you know, when I'm older, this is what I want to be. It's not a dream. They started rocking up to the prayer room. We started offering massages for prostitutes in the prayer room, you know, by trained Christian female masseuses, because, you know, this is the place of encounter. This is where people come and meet Jesus. If we're going to be the Biblia Pauperum to a prostitute, she needs to be touched in a way where she feels love and not abuse. There are some profound journeys that we will go on as we step into the place of prayer. One day, my wife, Tracy, was out on the street with another girl. And they went up to a group of women from a hen do. You'd have them bachelorette party. They'll just contextualize that for you. And they were all dressed as the devil, as you do. And so Tracy goes up, and they said, can we pray for you? And they start, and the bride, they pray for, we always pray, it's easy with bachelorette and bachelor parties, because we want to bless marriage, don't we? So you just say, can I pray for you? And they go, oh yeah, love you too. So Tracy's praying for this girl, and the girl starts to weep. And her friends come over and go, what are you doing making my friend cry? What are you doing? And they were all really aggressive. And the girl who was crying, she stopped, she said, no, it's not her. It's God in her. And they shall live with his face in view. And that they belong to him will show on their faces. As we delve deeply into the prayer room, as we connect with the divine, there is something of the glory of God. And when Moses came down from that mountain, he shone. We shine. So, excuse my emotions, it's not very British. But Adam is talking about weeping, so you know. So where did this take us? And this is where I want to land. That as these things popped up all around the world, new initiatives began to be birthed, the church began to grow as we prayed. We called people back to not only personal renewal, but to pray for a greater revival, all because a group of men and women said, yes, we will respond to requests and take an idea and run with it for a year. Nothing can change. Nations can change when the church unites in prayer. Nations can change when the church unites in prayer. We've heard that. Do you mind if I just blow my nose? Sorry, guys. Worst thing is like something dripping onto the microphone. Anyway. But there's loads. Anyway, let's not go there. Nations can change when we, the church, unite in prayer. So where has that taken us? I find myself in July this year, standing at home just before I'm about to go on a trip to South Africa. I'm phoned up by Andy and Helen Taylor, who have just moved to Peru, to Cusco, to plant a 24/7 prayer room in the belly button of the Incan Empire that has 2.5 million visitors every year coming to search for deeper spirituality. And they've plopped a prayer room right in the middle of that. And they've seen 22 different churches this year alone in the high Andes praying 24/7. And they say to me, Brian, we have just been given a piece of land on a mountain to put a prayer room on. We need 30K. And we're like, yeah, we can do that, you know, whatever. But it's like, this. And so then I get on the plane and I go to Pete Portal in South Africa, who's running a prayer room and running a prayer community in the middle of a township in a place called Manenberg, where at nighttime you will hear gunshots, where he regularly works with people who are addicted to heroin and addicted to all sorts of abuse and sees transformation because he believes in prayer. And it's a phenomenal thing him and his wife Sarah are doing. And they're living with the challenges and the tensions of that. This is where prayer will take you. This all began because Roger said, yeah, go for it, Pete. And God breathes on permission. God breathes on recklessness. God breathes on, well, I don't know what we're going to do, but let's just push into Jesus. This happened. Pete's there. Andy and Helen are in Peru. Whilst I'm with Pete, I get a phone call, and it's from a prince in Austria. I know that's weird, and I haven't got time to explain it. And he says to me, Brian, could you come to a meeting at the Vatican next Friday? And I'm like, in South Africa. I told Tracy we were going to have a chilled weekend. But I was like, yeah, no, that's fine, I can do it. I just went yes straight away. Everything in me just went yes. And so that by the next week, and normally when you go to the Vatican, I've heard from people who've been, it's a group thing. I was just on my own. And I had to go and meet with a cardinal, and his direct report is the Pope. And I found myself sitting in the Vatican explaining 24/7 prayer to a cardinal in one of the highest echelons of that beautiful movement, the Catholic Church. And I'm like, I've come from a township, in South Africa. And then the next 2 days later, I'm in a Middle Eastern, this is no lie, like 2 days later, I'm in a Middle Eastern country, working in a safe house with Adrian Eagleson, teaching and training some leaders who are going to go back into another nation, to the fastest growing nation in the world, where they will be imprisoned for their faith. And they're just the most happy, joyful people I've ever met. None of them adhere to any kind of like rule of life type stuff. They're so sold out, it's unreal, okay? And they're in there going for it. And I get back and I phone Pete up and he said, Brian, did you ever think this would happen 25 years ago? I said, not these 2 weeks? No. These last 25 years? No. And you know what? We stand on the verge of another 25 years as we... Is it everything? The Vatican, was it in our plans? No. Is a township in Manenberg amazing? Yes. Are we all called to go and build a prayer room in Peru? I don't think so. Will we all end up laying down our lives in the Middle East? No. But what I do know is that if we give ourselves no rest and give him no rest, that God is capable of doing extraordinary things. That we do not yet understand or know what could happen if we, the church in the USA, committed ourselves to this kind of prayer that wasn't weird, to the kind of prayer that wasn't insular, to the kind of prayer that wasn't focused on purely one issue, to the kind of prayer that appealed to every denomination, every strand of the church in this great nation. If we gave ourselves no rest and poured our hearts and our passions out to grow closer to him and to picture ourselves in the story, but also to somehow invoke the hounds of heaven in order that we could see revival and transformation in this nation. We could see renewal of a nation through her church who steps into the story and recognizes their place in it and prays. If this is a rally call, I'm not really good at rally calls, but this is it. Will you join us? Are you up for this? What God, I remember standing in a Delirious concert years ago. Your man was talking about the first song he ever sang to. I remember Martin first sang that song. That's how old I am. And one of the things he said, right, who's going to say yes? And we were like, yes. And he said, no, who's going to say yes? It was a very British moment. And then all of a sudden, actually, can we have the band up? Is that okay? Just briefly. We're landing it right now. And Tracy and I were like, yes, with everyone else. And before you know it, we're all going, yes, yes. And I believe that right then, 1997, God heard my yes. We waited a few years. 24/7 prayer was born. I said, Brian, I'm going to hold you to that yes. 2005, I'll send you to Ibiza. That yes that I uttered then, it came to pass. So I'm going to ask you to do something today, which is probably easier for you because you're not British. I just want you to say yes. I've got beautiful prayers we could pray, but I'd want you to say yes. So, let's stand. I haven't thought this through entirely. I'm going to pray, and at the end of my prayer, we're all going to do a bit of shouting yes. Does that feel all right? Cool. So, Father, we thank you that we are part of the story. And we are going to say to you today that we will give ourselves no rest until we see your kingdom come in this land. Lord, that we will pour our lives out. We will pour our hearts out. We will go where you will send us. We will be obedient to you. We will lay down our lives. We will do whatever you ask of us because we love you and we see your face in view and we want to follow you. So right now, as your body in this room, we're going to do something very un-British, and I'm sure you're fine with that, even though you're British. Lord, oh, Brian, that's God saying that to me. We're going to say yes. 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 Yes to you. Yes. And all God's people said, Oh, thank you so much.